I was never very afraid of many things, so I did things that would probably scare other people without really thinking about it. One thing I always did and still do today is enjoy walking at night. I'm a night owl, as I'm sure many people are, and my mind works better when it's dark outside. I started taking walks in the dark often, very late at night, when I was quite young. This happened when I was 14 years old. My family and I lived in an old house, deep in the countryside, at the top of a hill. Although the house was really nice, it didn't have air conditioning, so in the summer, all we had to keep cool were fans and open windows. Nowadays, I much prefer the cold weather and live in a cooler climate because of this, as it helps me sleep. Back then, and even today, if it was too hot, I had no chance of getting any sleep. I shared a room with my brother when we lived in that house. We kept the windows open and had a box fan that didn't oscillate. That summer night, I was very uncomfortable and couldn't sleep. I got up and tried to watch some TV. I always liked the shows that were on late at night. But even watching those shows wasn't enough to make me forget how hot it was inside the house. I checked, and it was much cooler outside than inside, so I decided to go out and take a walk. It must have been around midnight when I left. Everyone else was in bed, so I didn't tell anyone where I was going. But that wasn't a big deal. There was nothing around our house but hills, trees, and gravel roads. Anyway, I wasn't going to get mugged or anything like that. I just hoped that a walk in the cooler air would tire me out, and I could sleep much more easily when I got back home. I walked along the gravel road. There was no shoulder per se, but there was a bit of normal ground on both sides of the road. Walking on gravel, even with shoes, could be very uncomfortable, so I walked alongside and enjoyed it. I went quite far down the road, but no farther than I had gone before. Eventually, I decided to turn around and head back home when I reached a road that branched off the main road and thought it was a good place to turn around. As soon as I turned, the most interesting thing happened. A small black cat came running down the road I hadn't turned onto and ran straight to me. I always liked cats, although we didn't have one, and I stopped to pet the kitten. Of course, the cat was very receptive to the petting, and I almost didn't want to stop petting it. But I knew I had to get back home before staying out too long. When I started to walk away from the cat, it decided it wasn't ready to leave me. Instead, it began trotting alongside me. I thought it was adorable, but I was worried that the cat might get too far away from its owner and have trouble finding its way back home. However, trying to make the cat go its way proved useless. The cat definitely seemed to like me and decided to walk home with me. I thought there was nothing I could really do. The cat kept up with me as I walked, its little paws working quickly to keep up. It was very cute. As we know with cats, they can decide who they want to stay with, and I kind of felt like this cat was going to stay with me for a while. A bit after we had been walking, something distracted the cat. She stopped, and since I was paying close attention to her, I stopped and tried to see what was wrong. Something obviously seemed to be bothering her, and she even growled at something invisible in the forest. I got a little nervous, thinking that something bad might be out there, but I didn't see or hear anything. After a few moments, I managed to convince the cat to start trotting home with me again. She went back to moving her little legs quickly to keep up with me. After that, I started wondering what could have bothered the kitten so much. I also thought that whatever it was must have made my imagination start running wild. I actually began to think I was hearing someone or something walking in the forest beside me. The more I walked, the more I thought I was hearing things. I began to feel a bit scared for the first time, but the presence of the cat walking with me made me feel much better. The next time I heard something that definitely sounded like something in the forest following me, the cat also noticed. She took on a very similar stance to before. She started growling at something and grunting too. Since she was acting exactly the same way as before, I was convinced that whatever she had been threatening was definitely following us. I didn't know what it could be, human or creature, but I really just wanted to get home as quickly as possible. I would have picked up the cat and run with her, but I didn't want to. When she finally decided to start following me again, I tried to hurry as much as possible without going too fast for her. I could tell she wasn't an adult cat yet, and her little legs were getting quite a workout just trying to keep up with me in the first place. But the cat, whom I already considered my cat now, kept up with me and never fell behind. The rest of the walk home was nerve-wracking, although we didn't have another instance of the cat stopping. I kept hearing things in the forest, but I decided that if none of it bothered her enough to stop, I was probably okay. So, I just hurried, doing my best to ignore everything I was hearing in the forest. I was happy when I was almost back to my house. We had a really large yard and garage, so even though I was back in the yard, it was still a little walk in the dark to get to the house. I kind of expected the cat to go away because she had successfully escorted me home, but she didn't and followed me to the house. I decided I wanted to reward the cat for her escort and what I thought was her protection. I couldn't bring her inside the house right away since none of my family members knew about her, and they would be shocked to see a cat inside. If they noticed her while I was asleep, who knows what they would do? But I was sure she would wait for me while I went inside. I got some lunch meat and a bowl of water for the kitten and then went back outside. The cat was still there, but she was agitated again. She was looking towards the side of the house, towards the fence that separated our yard from the forest. When I looked over there, at first, I couldn't see anything, but as I looked more, I finally detected some movement near the fence. There was someone or something there, and it was clearly upsetting the poor kitten. It was when I could see the movement and the figure trying to climb the fence that I realized it was a person. And it was a person who was not making the cat very happy, so I figured it was someone doing something wrong. I had a rifle I kept in the garage and ran to get it. I hoped the guy, whoever he was, would see it and get scared and run off. I didn't want to shoot. When I came back with it, the guy was much closer, and I could see him much better. He looked very shabby, almost like a homeless person or something. He saw me with the gun, and then he stopped. That's when I noticed he had a hunting knife in his hand, and a chill ran down my spine. "Get off our property," I warned him. The man took a step towards me as if he was daring me to fire the gun. I did nothing until he took another step toward me. I fired the gun in his direction, not into the air, but I didn't aim at him deliberately. I missed on purpose. It was a warning shot, but a warning shot I hoped he took very seriously. He did. The guy turned and ran back to the fence. He climbed it and disappeared into the night. The rifle shot, of course, woke up my dad and my family. My dad came out onto the porch, and I had to explain to him what had happened. He took the rifle and told me to take the cat inside the house. He went to check the sides of the fence to make sure the guy was gone. We couldn't figure out who the guy was or why he was carrying a knife in the dark like he was. My dad thought, with the cat's reaction, maybe he was a crazy cat hunter. There are some pretty sick people out there who do things with cats, and maybe this cat had run away from him, or maybe he wanted to attack me, but the cat kept scaring him off. We don't know, but we didn't think we would have a problem with him since he knew we had guns in the house. We adopted the cat and named her Midnight. In the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened that night. During the day, the forest around our house seemed normal and peaceful, but at night, an oppressive sense of danger settled over the place. The sounds of the forest, which once seemed like just the nighttime wildlife in activity, now sounded like veiled threats, whispers of something lurking among the trees. Midnight adjusted quickly to our family. She was affectionate and protective, following me whenever I went out to the yard or the nearby forest. She seemed to have a sixth sense for danger, often stopping and growling at the darkness, even when I couldn't see or hear anything. It was as if she knew something we didn't. One night, a few weeks after the incident, I was again unable to sleep due to the heat. I decided to go for another walk, but this time, I took Midnight with me from the start. The gravel road stretched out ahead, the moon casting long shadows that danced as we walked. Midnight stayed close, her ears perked, eyes alert. As we walked, I heard the familiar sounds of the forest. But then, something else, a whisper of movement that was too deliberate to be an animal. Midnight stiffened, her fur bristling. I held my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same man from before, his eyes wild and desperate. He clutched his knife, the blade glinting ominously in the moonlight. Midnight hissed, her back arched, ready to defend. "Why are you following me?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't answer. He took a step closer, and Midnight growled low in her throat. I reached for my pocket, where I now kept a small, portable flashlight. I turned it on and aimed the beam directly at his face, hoping to disorient him. The man recoiled, covering his eyes. "Leave me alone," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She said you had to pay." I was confused and terrified. "Who? What are you talking about?" He didn't answer but lunged at me with the knife. I swung the flashlight, hitting his arm and making him drop the knife. Midnight launched herself at him, claws out, scratching and biting. The man screamed, swatting at her, but she was relentless. I grabbed a large stick from the ground and swung it at him, hitting him in the leg. He stumbled back, tripping over a root, and fell to the ground. Midnight continued to attack, her small body a blur of fury. Finally, the man managed to push her off and scrambled to his feet. "This isn't over," he spat, before turning and disappearing into the forest. I stood there, trembling, clutching the stick and the flashlight. Midnight came back to me, her fur still bristled, but she rubbed against my leg, purring softly. I knew then that she was more than just a stray cat, she was a guardian. We hurried back home, and I locked all the doors and windows, making sure we were safe. The next day, we reported the incident to the local authorities, but they couldn't find any trace of the man. They assured us they would keep an eye on the area, but I knew we had to be vigilant. From that night on, I never went for walks alone. Midnight was always by my side, her presence a comforting reminder that even in the darkest times, I wasn't alone. She had chosen me, and together, we faced the unknown, ready for whatever came our way. Since I was very young, every summer, I would make the same 6-hour car trip to a cabin that belonged to one of my uncles. It was near a lake, somewhere lost in the middle of a dense forest. During my youth, this became a family tradition. Everyone on my mother's side visited the cabin during the summer, like a mini vacation trip. I loved spending time with my cousins, with whom I was very close. The only part one didn't like was the long car ride. As I got older, I got a job and moved out of my parents' house. I started driving there alone every year. The 6-hour trip felt like an eternity when I was alone. However, the story I'm going to tell happened during one of those trips when I was forced to drive at night. That year, my boss made me work 2 consecutive shifts right before the trip, which made me leave work very late. My family was already at the cabin, waiting for me the next morning, so I had no choice but to make the trip at night. The road I was going to travel was always lightly trafficked, but at night it was even more deserted, passing through a dense forest with dark, densely clustered trees. I usually managed to complete the trip without stopping, but this time I noticed that my fuel was running low. I got irritated because I had lent my car to my brother while I was at work, and he had promised to refuel it. Unfortunately, he didn't keep his promise. I began paying attention to the signs along the road, desperately looking for a gas station. After a few minutes, I finally saw a homemade wooden sign staked into the ground, spray-painted, gas station near the exit. I turned at the next exit but didn't see anything immediately. I kept driving until the asphalt turned into a dirt road. Eventually, with the headlights, I managed to spot a gas station to the right of the road. It looked completely abandoned, with gas pumps removed, broken windows, and the roof almost collapsing. There was no way to get gas there. I looked at the car's dashboard and realized I had enough fuel for, at most, 2 more kilometers. With no options, I called roadside assistance, described my location, and turned off the car, waiting for the tow truck. 30 minutes passed, and my eyes began to adjust to the darkness around me. That's when I noticed slight movement inside the abandoned gas station. My heart raced. I fixed my eyes on the station, trying to convince myself that I was seeing things. That's when I heard a distant voice, almost a whisper, "Hey, buddy, come here." I looked in the direction of the voice and saw a figure standing beside the station. I was paralyzed, feeling my heart pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. After a few seconds, the figure started walking toward my car. When he got close enough, I could see he was wearing winter clothes and looked like a homeless person. He whispered through the slightly open window, "You need gas?" Excitedly, I replied yes. He then explained that he had gas in a container inside the station and was willing to give it to me for free. All I had to do was get out of the car and follow him. I firmly responded, no. There was no way I would abandon the safety of my car to enter an abandoned gas station with that man. His smile faded, and he stood there rigid, with a blank and frustrated expression. The uncomfortable situation lasted about a minute. Then I heard the best possible sound at that moment, the noise of the tow truck tires on the dirt road. The man's head turned towards the tow truck, and he ran back to the station, disappearing into the forest. As he ran, I saw something that froze my blood, at least 8 silhouettes of people hiding behind the bushes in front of the station, who also ran into the forest. When the tow truck arrived, the driver, a large and robust man, approached my window, confused. He asked if I was the person who had called for help, and when I explained the situation, he offered to call the police from the nearest town. He filled my car with gas, and I left before the police arrived. The next day, I was informed that none of those people were found. Since then, that night has haunted my thoughts. The man was clearly trying to lure me into a trap, but I don't know what the purpose was. I was on a deserted dirt road in the middle of the forest, far from any civilization. What would have happened to me if the tow truck hadn't arrived in time? I don't even want to imagine. As I drove, my heart was still racing, and the sound of the engine was almost a comfort, proof that I was getting away from that place. The road seemed endless, and every shadow in the forest seemed to move, as if the trees were alive, watching my passage. Finally, after a few tense hours, I arrived at my uncle's cabin. The lights were on, and the sight of the familiar cabin was an immediate relief. My mother and cousins were on the porch, waiting for me. They noticed my worried expression and asked what had happened. I told the story, but I didn't want to go into too many details at that moment. I just wanted to feel safe again. In the following days, the atmosphere at the cabin was different. I couldn't get the silhouettes of the people hiding in the forest out of my head. Who were they? Why were they there? And the man who tried to lure me into the abandoned gas station, what was his real intention? These questions haunted me throughout my stay. One night, while everyone was sleeping, I decided to investigate further. I grabbed a flashlight and went out to explore the area around the cabin. The forest seemed even more sinister at night, with the sound of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the wind. I walked for a few minutes, always looking back, feeling a constant presence watching me. That's when I found something that made my hair stand on end. In the middle of the trees, I saw marks on the ground, as if someone had dragged something heavy. I followed the marks, which led me to a clearing. There, in the center, was a small wooden cabin, looking as abandoned as the gas station. I approached cautiously and illuminated the interior with the flashlight. What I saw inside made me recoil. There were signs of recent occupation, dirty blankets, empty food cans, and footprints in the dust on the floor. But the most disturbing thing was the drawings on the walls, made with some sort of charcoal. They were human figures, all with contorted faces and expressions of pain and fear. In the center of each drawing was a taller figure, with shadowed eyes, watching the other figures. I quickly left the cabin, feeling an urgency to return to the safety of my uncle's cabin. When I arrived, I told everyone what I had found. We decided to call the local police again and report the discovery. They came to investigate but didn't find anyone. They only confirmed that the cabins seemed to be used by vagrants or homeless people, but couldn't determine who they were or why they were there. I returned home after that trip, but the memories of that night and the discovery in the forest didn't leave me. Every time I think about it, a sense of imminent danger surrounds me. The man who tried to lure me into the gas station, the silhouettes in the forest, and the cabin with the macabre drawings, all of this made me question what is really hidden in the shadows of those trees. From that summer onwards, the trips to my uncle's cabin were never the same. I started making the trip during the day and always with a full tank. And, although I continue to love my family and appreciate the time we spend together at the cabin, I never again felt completely safe in that place. The forest, with its secrets and mysteries, continues to haunt me, and I know that, in some way, it will never let me forget what I saw that night.